From now on, the three of us will live here. The house is large, so just the two of us would make you feel lonely. It's pitiful to leave my sister in a small apartment, and now is the perfect time for her to move. I hope you can support her job search." The moment the move was completed, my husband, acting all high and mighty, brought his younger sister Julia home. Just recently, my beloved grandfather passed away. Preparing for the funeral and sorting out his belongings, and above all, the sudden farewell to a loved one, had drained me both physically and emotionally. Since I inherited my grandfather's house as an heirloom, we decided to move there at my husband's suggestion. Finally, when the moving of belongings was completed, my husband brought Julia without consulting me. Such unreasonable behavior from my husband quickly cooled my feelings of love for him. My name is Lucy. I graduated from the local university's pharmacy department and am currently working as a pharmacist, entering my 5th year this year. My husband, a classmate, was introduced to me 2 years ago by a colleague at the hospital where I work. He works as a full-time employee at a supermarket and has a generous nature. He had broken up with his girlfriend from his student days and seemed to be heartbroken. I myself had a boyfriend only once in high school, but it did not last long. Both my husband and I have little experience in love, but that in fact gave us a sense of security. Our holidays rarely matched due to our different professions, but our relationship went smoothly, and we got married when he was promoted to chief at his workplace. After getting married, we started a new life in a convenient apartment in the city center. My parents died in an accident, and since high school, I have lived with my grandfather in his old house. The house, an old building, creaked every time you walked on the floor. However, my grandfather's chronic illness worsened 6 months ago, and his health deteriorated, leading to repeated hospitalizations, and he became hardly able to go outside. That house, filled with memories of my grandfather, is very precious to me, and even after moving, I regularly go back to clean it. My grandfather, fighting his illness, was very happy about my marriage and said strongly, "This motivates me to keep going." I promised to lead a happy life, keeping his words close to my heart. Fortunately, I was able to establish a good relationship with my husband's parents quickly, and although they live far away and we only meet a few times a year, they always say, "You are always welcome." The start of our married life was smooth, but there was one concern. It was about Julia. She is currently a first-year college student, a lively 19-year-old, living alone while attending a university near our apartment. She has moved away from her parents' home. The decision to choose this residence was mainly made by my husband, influenced by the fact that Julia would be attending a university in the city. The siblings have always been close, and Julia had expressed her desire to be near us. It's natural to get along well as a family. However, I immediately regretted not having more discussions with my husband, who had decided based solely on his sister's wishes. 3 days after moving, while I was trying to tidy up the remaining boxes on the weekend, my husband brought Julia over unexpectedly, catching me off guard. With no prior notice and me in casual clothes and no makeup, I couldn't just send her back, so I hurriedly made space and asked her to sit in the living room. Although we had met a few times during our courtship, those occasions were always pre-scheduled, and we met outside, so I was properly dressed. Feeling irritated with my husband, I decided to remain calm in front of Julia. "Congratulations on your marriage. Please take good care of my brother," said Julia, handing me a paper bag. Inside was baked goods from a famous Western confectionery store. "There's no need to be so formal. It would cost me a lot to return the favor," my husband said with an easy laugh, but I couldn't hide my agitation inside. Julia, with her lavish spending habits, owns expensive clothes and accessories that seem too mature for a student. I once asked my husband discreetly if she might be doing something improper, but whenever it comes to Julia, he changes his expression and says, "She wouldn't do such a thing, but I'll offer to help financially if she's in trouble." Julia certainly receives a monthly allowance from her parents. I've heard this directly from her mother and know the details of the amount, so I'm confident it's accurate. Despite receiving ample living expenses aside from tuition, she is now also receiving extra money from my husband. When I point out this excessive indulgence, my husband opposes it, and intense arguments arise between us. While I can understand his concern for Julia, I find it hard to accept him frequently buying her expensive bags and accessories, or cooking for her at her apartment. Other than that, he is a kind husband who takes the initiative in household chores, and I have no other complaints about him. The problem is Julia herself. She doesn't seem to think highly of me and has made condescending remarks. Having grown up in an environment where her parents and brother always catered to her, she probably sees me as an obstacle. I never thought someone like Lucy would become my brother's wife. He used to date only women who looked like models. Lucy seems rather plain by comparison. There's a difference between someone you love and someone you marry. I hope he doesn't cheat on you. Lucy, you have a good income as a pharmacist, right? Why don't you dress more fashionably? Weren't you introverted and focused only on your studies during your student days? These sarcastic comments were directed at me by Julia when my husband was not around. She is only 19 and still very immature, and dealing with her seriously is exhausting. I thought about complaining to my husband during her more persistent moments. But given his indulgent attitude toward her, the complications that would arise are not hard to imagine. Since the sarcasm remained verbal, I did not tell anyone about it. Knowing we would have a long-term relationship, I decided it might be counterproductive to rush into getting along, so I chose to build the relationship slowly. Julia, who had just recently arrived, visited again without notice. At that time, my husband had not yet returned home, and I was preparing for my afternoon work. The cafe was too crowded, so I came to have lunch here. I brought some friends too. Is that okay? Though her actions were unprecedented and it was difficult to keep my anger in check, Julia's friends were behind her, so I managed to send them away with a calm demeanor. I didn't ask for details, but later that evening while at work, my husband called me several times. Are you out of your mind sending hungry young people away from our home? If you were busy, you should have at least given them some money. My sister says you embarrassed her in front of her friends. It's unclear if this incident was the trigger, but I started to feel a shift in my husband's attitude afterward. We had agreed to share household chores since we both work, but he gradually began to neglect them, increasing my burden. I used to think he was mild-mannered, but it became clear that he was actually careless and fickle, often losing interest quickly in new hobbies and leaving items he had purchased for them unused. Not only in his personal room, but also on the dining table and in the car, his hobby items were scattered everywhere. I finally pointed it out, but he ignored me and took no action. I felt that his interest in me might be waning because of my nagging. Even with such disorderly behavior, Julia was the exception for my husband. The unannounced visits continue, and Julia's selfish behavior, where she eats our food and brazenly makes me suffer, doesn't stop. Initially, she secretly tormented me when my husband was not around. But lately, she has taken advantage of his indulgence and started being openly sarcastic. Julia frequently complains about the meals I prepare. This seasoning is too strong, isn't it? Are you really a pharmacist? Are you intentionally serving harmful things to make us buy your medications? You should be careful, brother. She makes malicious jokes about my profession, and my husband joins in with laughter. Furthermore, she regularly wheedles considerable amounts of money from him. I could understand if she needed money for living expenses or university textbooks, but it's clearly for her convenience when she buys birthday presents for her friends. And then she takes my husband shopping at high-end brands and lets him spend a lot of money. When I point this out, I'm countered with, I have the right to spend my own money however I like, and we can have a proper dialogue. Unbeknownst to my husband, Julia smirks behind my back, getting everything she wants while I get nothing. When I point something out, Julia quickly shows tears and dramatically seeks my husband's rescue. It's unfortunate that he is deceived by her excessive acting. I was too late to realize that my husband was overprotective. His unquestioning belief in Julia's stories and his blaming of me are laughable and enough to cool my affection for him. However, Julia will soon be a third-year university student, busy with job hunting and writing her thesis, and I won't see her as often, so I decided to be patient a little longer. I hope her challenging personality will soften after she graduates and quickly gets married. Yet, it wasn't my husband or Julia who fundamentally shook my life, but the death of my beloved grandfather. With no grandmother or parents, I inherited my grandfather's estate. While I was considering what to do with the remaining house and thought about demolishing it to preserve beautiful memories, my husband stopped me and suggested that we live together in this fine house. It was surprising that my husband, who had little contact with my grandfather during his long hospital stays, proposed maintaining this house, and at that time, I was genuinely happy. Though my grandfather is no longer here, I was able to return to this house. The excitement I had for the first time after we got married cooled down just a few months after moving. When we inspected the house before moving, we found that some minor repairs were needed, mainly in the water areas. My grandfather, who built this house when he was young, cherished it greatly, and the contractors also praised its good condition each time they visited. Although the creaking of the floors was a bit bothersome, we considered remodeling in the future when our family might grow. I gradually cleaned the rooms between work and also sorted through my grandfather's belongings. While packing up and contacting the moving company, my husband disappeared without any prior notice, and I thought he might have gone to a nearby convenience store. When it was time to leave and he hadn't returned, I called him in a panic, only to be told curtly, "Go ahead without me." Not knowing what was happening but unable to keep the movers waiting, I headed to my grandfather's house alone. I reunited with my husband only after all the belongings had been moved into the house and all the procedures with the contractors were completed. Seeing Julia standing right next to him gave me a bad feeling. That feeling became reality when my husband made an unbelievable statement. "From now on, the three of us will live here. The house is large and just the two of us would make you feel lonely. It's pitiful to leave Julia in a small apartment, and now is the perfect time for her to move. I hope you can support her job hunting." What? Why did you decide such an important matter on your own? This is my grandfather's house, so you should have discussed it with me first. It would be the same even if we had talked. The house will be livelier and Julia can focus on her studies and job hunting. Isn't that fine? It's a problem. We'll discuss the specifics later, but for now, can you please leave for today? I'm exhausted from handling the funeral and moving preparations alone for months, and just moving into this house after my grandfather's death doesn't make it the right time. But my husband shouted regardless. "How can you say such a thing? If you find living together so painful, you should be the one to leave. I was just making a suggestion with good intentions, and I didn't expect to be rebutted so arrogantly. I'd be relieved if you were gone. I will not tolerate anyone who disregards family." I was shocked not to be seen as family, but I kept my composure, realizing there was no need to seriously engage with such a ridiculous person. "So, you're saying I should leave, which implies a divorce. Is that okay with you? I'll say this now to avoid any misunderstandings later, but this house was inherited by me and it's in my name. The rights to this house are, if we divorce, there will be a division of assets. The house is also a valuable inheritance. Just because it belonged to your grandfather doesn't mean it's all yours. Things don't always go your way in this world. Even if we divorce, I am a legitimate ex-spouse and I have a right to half of it. I'll pay for your half, so please leave." Before I could respond, my husband's reply was utterly nonsensical. "Lucy, you're really strict about money, aren't you? Even though you earn your own? What does it mean that you're so greedy? You should be kinder to someone younger, lady. You might think I'm a young woman who squanders money, but girls need a lot of it. On the other hand, you wear those plain clothes every day, and with all that makeup, where are you spending your money? It's like you've completely given up on being a woman. Pitiful, isn't it?" Julia triumphantly criticized me alongside my husband. Seeing this, I completely lost any love for them and just wanted to leave the situation as quickly as possible. It's fine if we don't talk about the house rights anymore, but are you really okay with that? I've checked thoroughly, I said, but the siblings looked surprised for a moment and then started smiling again. You're trying to unsettle us and enjoy watching it, aren't you? That's appalling. Well, I appreciate your agreeing to the divorce. Here, please sign this. My husband handed me a divorce form that was already signed. It was fortunate for me, who had lost all affection, that the process was moving smoothly. Sorry, but does it bother you that I am more loved than you, Lucy? If you're considering remarriage, you might want to act a bit more feminine, they said, laughing. I sighed as I picked up the divorce papers that had fallen to the floor. Displeased with my attitude, Julia complained again. Out of the corner of my eye, I told my husband, "You're completely oblivious, aren't you? Poor thing. Your wicked sister might eventually drive you out too, so stop laughing and face it properly." Huh? What are you talking about? My husband still didn't understand, tilting his head. However, Julia, perhaps due to her youth, couldn't hide her agitation and her expression stiffened. As my husband looked confused, Julia retorted, "What are you talking about, lady? I would never do such a thing." But her nervousness seemed to affect him, and I noticed a change in his attitude. Seizing the moment, I forgot my fatigue and began to gently explain in order to turn the situation around. Actually, I overheard something at a pub near the university. On days you were infatuated with your sister and didn't come home. I was so exhausted from the paperwork and had no energy to cook, so I refreshed myself by dining out with friends. Saying that, I took out my smartphone on the spot and played an audio file I had recorded one day. My brother's wife's grandfather passed away, so that house will soon be ours. His old wife is a bit of a nuisance, but since my brother is on my side, it's fine. He listens to everything I say. I once helped my brother who was being bullied by my male friend, and since then, it's always been like this. Isn't it funny? Well, he has money, so I'm planning to use him cleverly to get that house. It'll be great not to have to pay rent, and the room is spacious. I'll live there with my boyfriend. Once I get the house, I'll slowly pull money from my brother and eventually drive him out. I think it's no problem. If my brother brings up divorce because of the house, that old wife will definitely panic. Fortunately, the pub was noisy, but where I was sitting was perfect for recording clearly. I started recording because I first heard them bad-mouthing not only me but also my husband. But as she and her boyfriend got more drunk, their terrible plan became apparent. I decided not to tell my husband about this information right away but to watch his reaction first. However, sadly, my husband, persuaded by his sister, readily brought up divorce, which I accepted. When I returned from the restroom, I confirmed that the main speaker had been Julia. As my husband looked at Julia, his face turned pale with fear and his voice trembled. Julia looked down for a while but suddenly looked up and retorted fiercely, blushing. "This is a fabrication. There's no way we'd coincidentally be in the same restaurant. You don't even know my boyfriend, and it's creepy how you're making conclusions just from seeing him a little. Even if it was really me, wiretapping is a problem. Play detective on your own and don't involve others." I then played the recording I had stopped again. The sound of heavy boots, staggering towards the restroom, was recorded. Right after that, a man was recorded talking on the phone with a woman. He spoke in a cloying voice, calling Julia an ADM and talking about his intention to get the house from her. The man boasted that he could get any gift from Julia if he begged, and he said he was also getting money from her because he wasn't working. It was revealed that Julia had previously given the luxury brands she received from her brother to her new boyfriend, and she was also paying him with the money she earned from her part-time job. When I first heard this, I sympathized with Julia being played, but now the situation had completely changed. She was advancing a dishonest plan behind the scenes, and my grandfather's house was nearly caught up in that scheme. I felt that she deserved to face the consequences of her actions. After the recording ended, I watched Julia's reaction. Her face already showed signs of confusion and shock, sinking into a state of complete bewilderment. From this scene, my husband must have undoubtedly realized that Julia was the woman talking to the man and was forced to accept the truth. That is all the truth I needed to share, and there is nothing more to say. As I was about to leave, my husband suddenly grabbed my hand, his eyes burning with fervor. "Wait a minute, Lucy, you know it too, right? I was just deceived. Let's reconsider the divorce. As promised, let's be happy together." However, I calmly responded, "No, there is no need to retract. I also desire divorce. Besides, isn't your dear sister crying? You should take care of her." Leaving those words behind, I briefly flashed my husband a refreshing smile, took my essential belongings, and left the scene immediately. I promptly submitted the divorce papers, and the divorce was successfully finalized. I was looking forward to enjoying single life, but the actual situation was more complex than anticipated, and things were not simple. My ex-husband continued to squat in my grandfather's house, showing no intention of moving. To avoid direct interactions as much as possible, I involved a lawyer. The lawyer repeatedly explained that the inheritance is not subject to property division, but my ex-husband exploded in anger at the law itself, shouting, "What about my rights then? How can a husband have no rights?" And the discussion made no progress. To resolve this issue, I frequently contacted and consulted with my in-laws. They responded swiftly, scolding both my ex-husband and his sister harshly at my grandfather's house and the sister's apartment, making the malicious siblings tremble. My father-in-law is very intimidating when angry, and later, my mother-in-law relayed this story to me with laughter. This explained why my ex-husband stopped visiting his parents' home. Even after the divorce was finalized, my in-laws deeply apologized to me, but I clearly explained that I was not contacting them to seek apologies. My intention was simply to settle matters and start a new life. I told my mother-in-law not to inform my ex-husband that I had changed my contact information, then quietly ended the call. I believe my ex-husband's persistent pursuit of the inheritance is probably due to a lack of savings. Despite my suggestion to open a new bank account for joint savings at the beginning of our marriage, he stubbornly refused. The reason was that he was spending substantial amounts on student loans, mobile phone bills, hobbies, and financial support for his sister, and he claimed he could not afford to save. Ultimately, we agreed to save individually, but as I am actively involved in investment activities, I do not have much cash on hand, and I do not have the means to give him a substantial share. Furthermore, I have conveyed through my lawyer that I will not claim dividing any property. Since my ex-husband signed the contract under the overwhelming intimidation of my father-in-law, it is necessary to ensure that he strictly adheres to this agreement. Ultimately, my ex-husband, who had been squatting in the house I inherited from my grandfather, and his sister, who recklessly spent her money, had to return to their parents' home. My unemployed ex-husband and his sister, who dropped out of college, have taken low-level jobs at a company run by relatives, enduring days of intense physical labor. Under strict supervision, they are being retrained both mentally and physically, laboring in tears each day. During this time, my mother-in-law sent a photo showing how the long hours of work have changed my ex-husband's physique, turning his bare belly into a toned one, but this sparked no emotion in my heart. As for my sister-in-law, she initially tried to use her youth and attractiveness to get close to her boss. But since the president is a relative, her plans utterly failed. Now, having removed all her glamorous nails, she is engaged in agricultural work, experiencing fulfilling labor. Meanwhile, I spend tranquil days in my grandfather's nature-filled house, mourning his death but able to immerse myself in memories by looking through the albums I've organized. In this warm and peaceful home, I plan to host small parties for close friends in the future. This is my small joy and the step towards my new daily life.
My name is Anna. I am 25 years old and work as an architect. While handling my duties at a local architectural firm, I spend my days off relaxing by reading books. My childhood was unimaginably tumultuous, a stark contrast to my current peaceful life. The person who brought me happiness was not my biological parents, but my aunt, who is always cheerful and overflowing with love, 12 years older than me. Today, I want to talk about precious memories with her. As a child, I was treated coldly by my strict parents, especially noticeable in the first grade. Making such a simple mistake. Don't you think it's embarrassing not to get a perfect score on a first grader's test? They scolded, and all I could say was, "I'm sorry." Ah, why did such a child come from us? My mother would say disappointedly. Their sighs were painfully heart-wrenching. Failing to meet their harsh expectations, I was a mix of frustration and sadness. I was born into a doctor's family in a posh residential area of a provincial city, with a doctor father and a nurse mother. From my early childhood, I was sent to private schools, expecting to become a doctor. However, contrary to the expectations of my family and friends, my academic performance was mediocre, and reaching the top ranks was challenging. Right after starting school, I felt unwanted by my parents and was constantly irritated by them. Despite this, I studied alone for long hours at home and at cram schools after returning home, striving to gain my parents' approval. On the other hand, my sister, 1 year younger than me, Doris, was exceptionally gifted academically. Even as a kindergarten student, she was learning advanced material that surpassed mine. This meant that if we took the same tests, she would perform better. Naturally, my parents were captivated by the high-achieving Doris, spending most of their time and resources on her, which led to me being forced to quit cram school before the second grade. Being abandoned by my parents was a shock, and I immersed myself in solitary study in an attempt to improve. Despite these efforts, my parents only saw me as not only poor in studies but also a gloomy and reclusive person. However, the bond between us sisters was strong, and Doris always adored me. This was certainly reassuring, but my self-loathing from feeling inferior to my sister never disappeared. As I progressed to the second grade and my sister Doris entered school, the unfair treatment became even more severe. On holidays, to broaden her education, my parents often took only Doris to theaters and museums in the city center. I was told, giving pearls to pigs who don't appreciate their value is a waste, and I was forced to stay home alone until dinner. Doris, always wearing a guilty expression, seemed to want to say something to our parents but never spoke up. I spent my time alone at home, continuously crying to the cheerful voices of other families I could hear outside. Feeling unintelligent, I believed neither my father nor my mother cared about me. Having thought parental love was everything, I continually blamed myself. Then one day, my parents decided to take only Doris on an overnight trip to a distant museum, likely thinking they couldn't leave me alone for 2 days. On the morning of the trip, I was hurriedly woken up and taken to an old apartment in the next town. There my father, with a displeased look, rang the doorbell, and a disheveled blonde woman opened the door. It was Carol, my father's much younger sister, and my aunt. After a brief conversation, my father returned to the car without even a glance at me. Holding a large bag and left behind, a sleepy Carol said, "Come," and gesturing with her chin towards the room. I hadn't interacted much with Carol, having only spoken to her a few times as we weren't very close. My father had repeatedly warned me, "Stay away from Carol, she's from the lower class and barely finished middle school." Indeed, Carol's first impression was a bit suspicious with her pudding-like blonde hair and gray sweatshirt. Yet, while apprehensive about being left in her care, I sat on the thin cushion in the living room. Feeling uneasy, I was suddenly greeted by the comforting smell of food. Along with it, Carol appeared, holding a tray with clam chowder and scones. "Didn't have breakfast, did you?" she asked, to which I cautiously replied while sipping the clam chowder, "No, thank you." The rich broth slowly spread through my mouth. Delicious. Right? Clam chowder is the best for breakfast, Carol laughed. Carol's warm smile and the clam chowder eased my tension. Over the next 2 days, Carol took great care of me. The stews and risotto she made were delicious, and I ate without any reservations. While she watched over me, she would smile and ask, "Want some more?" as she offered additional servings. Furthermore, Carol took me to the zoo and genuinely enjoyed showing me around, pointing out, "Look at that gorilla. Isn't it cool?" That day at the zoo was truly enjoyable. From then on, whenever my family went on trips, I was always left in her care. Carol always welcomed me warmly. Gradually, I came to trust her and was genuinely drawn to her warm personality. Carol often said, "I always wanted a little sister like you," and treated me with great care. However, while my parents continued to leave me with her, they spoke ill of her. I heard that Carol had troubles during middle school and did not go on to high school. According to my father, she ended up in a bottom-tier job and barely made a living. "If you don't want to end up like her, don't slack off in your studies," my father would say half-jokingly when he was drunk. I had always believed my father's words as absolute, but I found it hard to accept his assessment of Carol. She was skilled in cooking and a very good person. I could not understand why she was spoken of so negatively. The difference in how my parents treated my sister and me worsened day by day. By the time I was in 3rd grade, I was given only the bare minimum of clothes and food, barely avoiding a report to Child Protective Services. Although my parents were known as local dignitaries, outsiders would never imagine they were capable of such behavior. When I focused on studying, I was told, "You're a nuisance if you don't leave the room, so get out," and was chased outside. Whether I studied or not, the situation was harsh. I wasn't allowed to return home until dusk, and without any trustworthy friends or adults, I had to spend my time learning in parks or libraries. However, on weekends, Carol warmly welcomed me. Carol was the only one who cared about my health. One day, as I was eating the fluffy omelet she had made, Carol suddenly made a proposal. "Anna, would you like to live with me?" she asked. As I sat stunned, she gently stroked my head with her cold hand. "If you feel life at home is hard, think of me as a parent. We'll eat together every day, sleep side by side, and even go to the zoo sometimes," she said. Could such a dreamlike proposal be real? Just hearing it felt surreal. "But you might not want a dumb parent like me," she laughed self-deprecatingly. I blurted out, "That's not true." Her proposal was incredibly appealing. However, I questioned whether I could truly wish for such a thing. Carol was still unmarried, and I worried that living with me might burden her. Additionally, I considered whether my parents would see it as a betrayal. "Carol, is it really possible for me to live with you?" I asked quietly. Carol gave a thumbs up and replied with a smile, "It's okay. Okay." It was an irreplaceable moment. I strongly desired to become like family with Carol, and made up my mind. Later, Carol discussed this with my parents, but their opposition to me living at her house was surprisingly strong. It seemed to stem not from affection but rather from a concern for social appearances. They disliked the idea of having to explain to the community why one family member was missing. After much discussion, it was decided that I would simply stay as a lodger at Carol Clay's house, and no adoption took place. Once everything was settled, things moved quickly. With just my essentials and my school bag, I moved to Carol's house. On the last day at home, my parents coldly said, "Don't neglect your studies. If you become a nuisance and trouble us, we'll send you to an institution right away." Only my sister seemed genuinely sad about my departure. But even my young sister could sense that I was being neglected by our family. As she tearfully said goodbye, she told me, "Big sister, I love you." Though I still harbored feelings for my family, my sister's tears pained me. When I appeared before Carol with mixed emotions, she greeted me with a beaming smile, exclaiming, "Yay, I'm so happy you've come to stay with me." At that moment, I vowed to become a family with Carol that neither of us would be ashamed of. Starting a new life with Carol was not without its challenges. Support from my parents was minimal, and I had to transfer from a private to a public school. Despite this, every day was filled with joy. When I struggled with homework, Carol would sit with me and look through the textbooks, trying her best to find the answers together. Even when I didn't score perfect on tests, she would celebrate my 90%, saying, "90 points is amazing. You're really something, Anna." with Carol's support. I gradually became more outgoing, made friends to play with after school, stopped going to cram schools, and spent less time studying. Strangely, my grades improved even without much effort, and I was able to maintain top marks in my class. The chronic stomach pains and fatigue that I had disappeared a significant change for me. I believe they were due to the stress caused by my parents' strictness during my childhood. By the time I reached 6th grade, I had grown emotionally, the influence of my parents began to fade, and I freed myself from the narrow worldview they had created. As my sister got older, she started sneaking out to visit me at Carol's house. She was still performing well academically, which made our parents proud, but she seemed to have other interests and often expressed her frustrations to me. When Carol cooked, my sister would watch with shining eyes and always help out by her side. 8 years flew by since I started living with Carol, and I enrolled in a national university's architecture department. There was a special reason I chose this faculty. Also, because I received a grant-based scholarship, I didn't need to ask for financial support from my parents, and I didn't burden Carol either. On the day I was accepted to my first choice university, Carol cried tears of joy and made my favorite dish, seafood dresta. Over celebratory drinks, she sprinkled her conversation with stories of her own origins, revealing that she was the result of her mother's affair. While her father initially raised Carol as his own child, concerned about public perception, he ultimately treated her without affection. Despite her early longing for parental love, Carol entered a rebellious phase and became almost estranged from her parents, who were, in fact, my paternal grandparents. "Anna, you've turned out so well. You didn't follow the wrong paths I did, and you've grown so much." By the time she was 30, the flamboyance of her youth had faded, and Carol's serene gaze was filled with deep emotion as she looked at me. "It's all because you were there, Carol. Without you, I don't know where I would be." The thought of what could have happened if Carol hadn't offered to become my family that day made me shiver. Carol caressed my head with the same affection as she had 8 years ago. A year after I started my hopeful student life, a spring day brought an unexpected confrontation at my apartment. It was my parents, their eyes red with anger. "Did you too deceive Doris?" they shouted. What I replied, caught off guard. "What happened to Doris? Which medical school is she going to?" I asked back, which only deepened the redness in their faces. "Don't joke. You must know about Doris. Doris has gone off to do her own thing." My father was too agitated to finish his sentence. I knew what had upset them, so I responded appropriately. It seems Doris has enrolled in culinary school. Did you put her up to this? You've given her these bad ideas." I hadn't done anything of the sort. In reality, while Doris let our parents believe she was preparing for medical school, she had secretly aspired to study nutrition and was accepted into that program. She will be starting her studies in nutrition, not medicine, this April. You think you're in a low place, so you're jealous of your sister becoming a doctor. How wicked, my mother accused me angrily. That's not true. Doris chose her path on her own. Don't lie. There's no way that an excellent child would choose to be a nutritionist. In fact, Doris is not ultimately aiming to be a nutritionist, but I kept that fact to myself. Mom and Dad have never really understood Doris. Mom stomps her feet in anger. "That's your fault. It has nothing to do with Anna." "What?" From behind me, Doris and Carol appear. Surprised to see Doris here, my parents' anger intensifies. Then, they turn their criticism towards Carol. "Carol, is this your doing? Did you lead not only Anna but also Doris down the wrong path? I think that's none of your business." As if to protect Carol from my father's attempt to attack her, Doris steps forward. "Don't blame Carol. It was because I showed an interest in cooking that she offered her kitchen to me." Indeed, as Doris visited Carol's house to see her, she developed an interest in cooking and gradually became passionate while helping out in the kitchen. Focused solely on her academic performance, my parents seemed not to notice even when she came home smelling of sesame oil. Though culinary school was considered, she could not leave home without a scholarship, so she chose nutrition instead. Like me, Doris received a grant-based scholarship, which enabled her to stand up to her parents. She aims to be a chef in the future. My father's lips tremble with anger. Doris, I'll accept you taking a gap year, so withdraw from the university immediately and go to a preparatory school. I absolutely refuse. Doris firmly opposed my father's unilateral outburst. Seeing this, my mother tried to reason with Doris gently. Doris, going into a profession like nutrition or cooking, which anyone can do, isn't worthy of your talents. Everyone is expecting you to become a doctor. In that case, Mom, can you cook? What? If anyone can do it, do you know how to perfectly fry popcorn, shrimp, or make bechamel sauce? Well, that's. It was clear that my mother was not skilled in the kitchen. She had always relied on deli foods and delivered meals to get by. As a result, Doris and I were completely enchanted by Carol's home cooking. While my mother was at a loss for words, Doris laughed coldly. It's really ironic to live relying on the help of others to cook for you, and then look down on chefs. Well, instead of forcing me to become a doctor, it would be better to give my place to someone who truly desires to be one. It would contribute more to helping others. That's just an excuse. Mom, Dad, don't you know? Actually, my sister is far more talented than I am. What? My parents stood with their mouths agape. There's no way that's true. Do you even know which university my sister is attending? My parents looked at each other. As I thought, you don't know. You also don't know how excellent the architecture department is at the university she attends. She was accepted into a national university's architecture program because she is academically excellent. While it might be an exaggeration to say Doris is more talented than I am, it's a fact that I became a top student thanks to Carol's support. It's true, Mom and Dad. You wouldn't know how well I did in school because you never attended any of my parent-teacher conferences. With that, my parents lost their momentum and fell silent. I looked at them with a cold gaze. The success in raising Anna wasn't due to you, but thanks to Carol. Doris laughed as if she had given up. That can't be true. It's impossible. Don't worry. I've arranged for my tuition myself, and I'm prepared to live on my own. I've already moved my things. You didn't notice, did you? What? The color drained from my parents' faces as they had been furious just moments ago. Carol watched this unfold, looking completely fed up. You both were only ever interested in grades. It's a shame that your wonderful children weren't understood for who they are. Feeling humiliated, my parents groaned in discomfort. Being pitied by Carol, whom they had once looked down upon, must have been the ultimate humiliation. But that was the reality. My parents found no words to retort. Eventually, Doris left home that day with the help of a friend, relocating to another state, over 5 hours away by car. I didn't expect this incident to prompt any improvement in my parents' behavior or make them back off from Doris and me. When I advanced to my second year of university, my parents suddenly called me. I couldn't shake off an ominous feeling. No matter what they say, I would firmly refuse to return home. We met at a restaurant they frequented, but when Carol accompanied me, my parents clearly showed their displeasure. As soon as we sat down, they spread out numerous pamphlets on the table, all from universities with medical schools. What's this? We're giving you a chance to retry for medical school. Isn't that a good deal? We're offering you a chance to redeem yourself. Show that you can surpass your sister because of whom you've been looked down upon. Such an unexpected turn of events. How foolish. They really don't understand. But I decided to play along, just for amusement. Really? I'm so happy. Maybe I can actually get in here. To think that you both care so much about me. I really should be thankful. My father nodded, looking pleased with himself. My mother's face also brightened. As if that could ever be true. I couldn't hold back my laughter and burst out laughing. Ha, 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 ha. What's wrong? I just laughed seeing Dad so happy. To take such a proposal seriously? Impossible? After all, I have my own life. What? The moment my parents realized I was joking, their faces rapidly turned red. They are as quick to anger as they are far from the intellectual caliber of a doctor. Doris has never looked down on me. It's you who have always looked down on us. That's, well. Anyway, I have no intention of trying for medical school again. I responded with firm resolve, and a vein throbbed on my father's forehead. Why can't you and Doris understand the nobility of being a doctor? Is this also Carol's fault? Once again, my father directed his blame at Carol, completely missing the point. Carol simply gave a wry smile. Brother, you're so stubborn. What did you say? Anna and Doris aren't denying the work of doctors, they just have passions elsewhere. And those are in professions like architecture, nutrition, and cooking, which anyone can supposedly do. Even if they are jobs anyone can do, that's fine. What? Startled by the sudden voice, my father turned around to see two muscular, healthy-looking men standing there. Who are you? Perfect timing, you just insulted an architect and his son. What? They looked surprised. At that moment, Carol stood up and gently pulled the young man next to her closer with her arm. This is my husband. It's an honor to meet you, brother-in-law. I am Alexander Davis. Carol has told me a lot about you. Yes. Carol's husband smiled, showing his white teeth. Actually, Carol had started dating Mr. Davis 5 years ago, and they officially got married when I turned 20. Despite my reassurances, they were stubborn and affectionate enough to wait to marry until I was an adult. As a result, I became close to Carol's in-laws and developed an interest in architecture. When Carol suddenly announced her marriage and her husband spoke meaningfully, my parents were taken aback and lost for words. Next, Carol's father-in-law stepped forward with a smile and began to speak. Nice to meet you, Dr. Barnes. I am Davis, and I run an architectural business in this area. I understand Anna has heard about my work from Carol and has taken an interest. You are truly an insightful, wonderful person. Yes. I am planning to retire from the field soon, and I would like Anna to join our company as an architect and learn the ropes to carry on in the future. How dare you decide such a thing on your own? As they raised their voices, Davis opened his eyes wide and stared at them. Even if you call it presumptuous, the fact that you have shown no interest in Anna so far is undeniable. Trying to manipulate Anna after her sister has left the house is quite reprehensible, don't you think? How rude. How much do you think outsiders understand about us? Indeed, that's true. But then again, human relationships are mostly about interactions with others. What? Davis looked around. My parents also looked around and could see their faces losing color. Other customers at the restaurant were looking at them with cold eyes. Raising one's voice inevitably attracts attention. Everyone is disappointed. We never thought Dr. Barnes, whom we've respected for so long, could look down on others like this. That's not true. As my father trembled, his favorite dish was served. The chef of the restaurant brought it over. Dr. Barnes, I'm sorry. It must be difficult for you to eat food prepared by us ordinary workers. You no longer need to endure it. Unfortunately, this marks the end of our relationship with you. I will communicate the same to other restaurants. Wait, that's not what I meant. We feel it is not appropriate for people who can be replaced to use your clinic, so we will no longer visit. I will inform